So I read this article on how basically their Iran war has affected the U.S. economy on CNBC. Credit to Jeff Fox. Um, but kind of the main ways that it shows up is energy prices and the Federal Reserve. That's kind of how it's hitting the United States at the moment. And there really doesn't really seem to be an indication that things are going to slow down. President J.D. Vance, I'm sorry, Vice President J.D. Vance and met with I think the leaders of Pakistan and other nations to try and potentially try and solve this crisis, or at least get a step closer. But they would not agree to the United States terms. So that obviously is probably not a great sign. Um, so the inflation rate currently right now is 3.3%. It is up from 2.4% from last month. I mean, from February, I believe. So it jumped a little bit, and one could say that the Iran war has sort of contributed to that. Um, but the price of gasoline has jumped quite a bit. In fact, I believe if you look here, it was about $3 in March. The average gas price, just about $3. And mid-April, in about a month and a half, it's jumped to $4.12. So, in the span of a month and a half, it's jumped to 33% for the average price. And so that's about 33%. And there's been about a 16.5% jump in spending at the gas station. So people are now spending 16.5% more dollars at the gas station, and obviously that's not a great thing. And if you look at the truckers and the people that really run this nation, most semi trucks use diesel, and diesel is obviously much worse than gasoline right now when you look at it. So clearly not the greatest effect that it's having. The effects at the Strait of Hormuz, and the fact that we get a bunch of our energy from the Middle East. That's affecting people's pockets, and a lot of people are having to be a lot more wary in their budgets because they know that gasoline is obviously in a car dependent country such as the United States, gasoline is pretty darn important. So that's one of the things that has been one of the effects that has been as a result of that. And in addition, interest rates, they have not gone down. The Federal Reserve has sort of been waiting and has been uncertain of what to do because this war has created so much uncertainty, whether it's whether there's gonna be a ceasefire or not. Supposedly there was one, not too long ago, but since Israel started striking Lebanon, that ceasefire was shortly broken, and now the Fed, you would expect in a time of economic downturn to lower interest rates to kind of revitalize people borrowing and kind of revive the economy. Well, they're really not doing anything about it. So you're gonna buy a house or get a loan for whatever. Well, the Iran war might be affecting your ability to get a lower interest rate, which is pretty darn important for many people. Um, and honestly, the sentiment of the economy, despite inflation only being 3.3%, is really bad right now. In fact, a Michigan survey actually recorded that this might be the lowest consumer sentiment we've had in decades. Even during the COVID-19 pandemic, or even during the 1970s inflationary period, which I did not live through, but I do understand that it was a pretty desperate time for many people. People are feeling really bad about it. However, people are still spending money. I believe the consumer spending is still modestly growing by 8.8% this year. and 1.7 over the course of next year. So it's not terrible, but consumer sentiment is low, but that's not necessarily a sign of that people are spending less money. But still, that's obviously a bad thing. Of course, with Trump's big, beautiful bill, people are getting slightly higher tax refunds, which, in times like these, could play a role. But I guess to kind of summarize it, interest rates, that's being affected, and gasoline prices. And I think how it's affecting the Trump administration is not great. Trump obviously was known to handle the economy in a better way than previous presidents, but during at least during his first term, but his second term, not quite there yet. Not quite there in terms of I mean, obviously we're in a better period than COVID, but things could be heading in a better direction. And remember, Trump has had these tariffs on China for a while and other countries ever since he did that Liberation Day. And in the short term, it's sort of exacerbated, prices for certain things. So, that's kind of when you combine all these factors together, many people are feeling desperate, at least in this country, in terms of being able to afford things and stuff like that. So that's a little summary of it, and I'll probably bring you more in the next video. But this is just an interesting thing that I found on NBC, written by Jeff Cox, on how the Iran war has been affecting the U.S. economy.